Hello and welcome to Apple Core. I'm Graham Bauer, a designer, writer, and longtime Apple user.
And I'm Charlie Sorrell, also a long-time Apple user. And I've been writing about Apple and other technology for a long time now.
Longer than you want to admit.
Yes.
So, Apple Core is a podcast about Apple history. In each episode, we look at a different Apple product to understand what its history tells us about how the company ticks. And so, Charlie, I have a teaser for you for today's topic.
What standards can you name that Apple has adopted but gave its own proprietary name to?
Let's see. There was USB, which it used for Lightning. Does that count?
Oh, is Lightning USB?
Yeah, it's USB under the hood with a few with a different plug, but it works over USB.
What about where Apple takes a standard, implements that standard, but then arbitrarily just chooses to call it something else?
Okay. Let's see. Did they invent rendezvous?
Oh, that's good, yes. Which later was renamed
to Bonjour.
That is a bonus point. There's one other obvious one.
Is it Firewire?
Yes.
Yeah, it was a Sony thing, right?
Yeah. Well, Sony called it iLink. I'm looking for one more standard that Apple implemented that they gave their own name to. If you need a clue, then the clue is its standard name is 802.11.
Oh, it's AirPort.
It is AirPort, that's right, yes. AirPort, commonly known as Wi-Fi, but known in Mac OS X as AirPort right up until 2011. It's exactly that kind of technology, which just gives you a peek into Apple's playbook. And I think a lot of what we can learn in looking at the rise and fall of AirPort, it tells us a lot about how Apple approaches technology, how it thinks about technology, and how it phases products out over time as well. So, what do you know about AirPort?
I had the original AirPort, which was the cone-shaped thing, no? And I bought one of those.
It looks like a UFO.
The UFO, that was it. And it was great. I ran a bar in London and I wanted to put Wi-Fi in it because this was before anyone had Wi-Fi anywhere.
Yeah.
And I just wanted it for my own use, not for the customers because the customers were too busy getting drunk on our cocktails. But and it wasn't a thing for places to have Wi-Fi.
No, it wasn't.
You went to an internet cafe for that.
Yeah. And you used
yeah.
Ethernet.
Yeah, I ran. Yeah, you did. Well, I ran Ethernet up from the basement office, which was like 3 floors down, into our bar, which was 1 floor down, into the DJ booth, and because there were wires going into that, and put the Wi-Fi in there. And everybody complained that I was spending the bar's money on it, but then when everyone realised they could just sit anywhere and use the internet, they were very happy.
So you created one of the world's first Wi-Fi hotspots.
I guess I did. Look at that.
Always a pioneer.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of our listeners today, it's maybe hard to imagine a world without Wi-Fi, right? It's so integral to so much technology that we use today. 1999 was the year that Apple introduced the world to Wi-Fi. It was a remarkable thing at the time. Now, Apple didn't invent Wi-Fi, but they were the first to put it into a mass market product. Before that, no one was selling anything remotely like this. And that is why Apple wanted to do something pretty dramatic to introduce this idea to people. And Charlie, do you know what they did?
Was it during was it a Macworld?
It was Macworld Expo New York in 1999.
Yeah. And Steve Jobs forced Phil Schiller to climb up a ladder with a laptop, and then he made him jump off the platform onto a crash mat.
Exactly, yeah.
To prove that there were no wires.
This was a live, pretty serious stunt. And I thought we maybe should watch that stunt right now, Charlie, if you're up for that.
Okay. There he goes. Jesus, he's high up.
It is high up. React to it. What are you seeing?
Okay, so there's a big curtain at the back of the stage of a theatre full of nerds.
Yeah.
There's a big screen on either side to show you what's happening. And then there's Phil Schiller, really quite high up.
Yeah.
It's kind of making me think of Statler and Waldorf in the Muppets, that kind of height, but up on a black.
There's a great big chasm, and Phil Schiller is on the edge of that chasm. And
he's on the edge of the chasm. He's holding a laptop, and it's really. I mean, what is it? It's like about 4 or 5 meters up.
I think it is. Yeah, I mean, it's a serious
Maybe
height.
more.
He says, "One small step for man, one giant leap for wireless networking."
There you go. That's an excellent bit of corporate talk. And there he goes. He's looking. Okay, so now it's closing up on him. It's a bit wobbly.
Yeah.
He's holding the laptop.
Yeah.
He's looking a little bit nervous. Maybe he's still talking. And there he goes. He just jumps off. He kicks his legs.
Yes, his legs are wiggling as he goes down. That, to me, the wiggling legs shows just how far the drop is, because he wiggles them a lot before he lands.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, and I'm seeing. Okay, so Steve's happy that the thing went off. Probably doesn't care if Phil survived. He's just happy that there was no mistakes, and he's patting Phil on the shoulders, and it's revealed that Phil has got quite a mullet.
And then Steve Jobs says, "Nothing is beyond the call of duty at Apple."
I wonder if he had to practice it a lot. There's no way they do that now. Can you imagine the insurance having a high-level Apple executive like take a risk like that live?
Exactly. And it was so much more fun. Those video presentations they do now, they're so predictable. They're so cheesy. Everyone does the same hand gestures. It's just boring.
And everyone on YouTube and every other video presentation does those hand gestures too, because they're copying Apple. And also, I'm sorry, I'm taking us off track already, but they always say somebody else, some other company or introducing a product, they say, and we can't wait to see what you'll do with it.
And they say gorgeous too much as well.
Wow.
But actually, while we're on that in terms of keynote presentation style, there was a special guest who did an impersonation of Steve Jobs at the start of this very keynote, the 1999 Macworld keynote. And can you remember who that special guest was?
Oh, I remember it, but I can't. No, tell me.
It was Noah Wiley from TV's ER, which was huge at the time. He does a really surprisingly good impersonation there. 1999 is the year that we're in. Steve Jobs was the iCEO. Do you remember what that was about?
Oh, the interim CEO.
Yeah, it was written with a lowercase I, like iMac. He would be the interim CEO for another year until he took the job on. He was a CEO of Pixar 2, and 1999 was the year of Toy Story 2. I think Toy Story was huge, but maybe Toy Story 2 just took it stratospheric. So I think that Steve Jobs was hedging his bets. I think he was drawn to Apple because he loved it. It was his baby. But then he equally, for the first time in his life, he was having massive success without anyone spoiling it. He was taking a risk in going back to Apple because 2 years prior, in 1997, people really thought the company was about to go bust. People thought it was over for Apple. No one really took it seriously as a company anymore. He didn't need to take the CEO job. He just couldn't resist it, but he didn't take it altogether. He sort of half took it with this iCEO title. At this point, it's 1999. He's been there for a couple of years and he's engineered something of a turnaround. It's only a moderate turnaround. So the iMac has come out. It's a great seller, but it's only really a great seller in terms of Mac sales at the time, which were dismal. If you look at it in terms of Apple products today, it would have hardly been a blip. We're not looking at an Apple in 1999 that is massively successful, but we are looking at an Apple that has the media's attention because it's doing cool things. A year from now, again, Apple would announce Mac OS X with a user interface so beautiful you want to lick it.
Lickable.
Yeah,
lickable buttons.
Yeah, the Aqua user interface. That hasn't been announced yet. So we just have this iMac and we have a really cool CEO in a black turtleneck. Lots of promise of things to come, but those things haven't come yet. It's 1999 and Wi-Fi doesn't exist. So nowadays we use the internet everywhere, right? We use it on our cell phones. We use it lying in bed. It's just everywhere. But before Wi-Fi, when you went on the internet, you had to be sitting at your desk because people plugged in an Ethernet connector.
Yeah, or more likely, this time still a modem cable.
Yes, exactly. But in all cases, it was tethered to a desk. As soon as you went away from your desk, even if you had a laptop, you didn't have an internet connection anymore. We can't really tell the story about the AirPort launch without touching on iBook a bit. And I don't want to get too much into the original iBook because I think it's worthy of an episode in its own right. But we do need to touch on it a bit in order to understand AirPort, because I think what it does is it explains how Steve Jobs took a technology that had been kicking around for a while and just nailed it in terms of what it was for. Steve Jobs, when he came in 1997 to Apple, they had loads of different Macs. It was a really complicated product lineup, and he said, we're going to scrap all that. We're just going to have this matrix of 4 products. Do you remember the 4-quadrant strategy?
Yeah, there were professional and consumer.
Yeah.
And then portable and not portable.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and so you'd have the iMac, there was the Power Mac, there was the PowerBook, and then an empty quadrant.
Exactly that, yeah. So that's where they got to. He's released 3 of them now. come 1997, the iMac was the consumer desktop. We had the Pro desktop and the Pro portable with the Power Mac and the PowerBook. And so the iBook was the final quadrant. And it was a very logical name because PowerBook was the Pro portable and iMac was the consumer desktop. So then iBook was really the logical name for the consumer portable. And of course, iBook today, the equivalent is the MacBook Air, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so I think when Apple was going to introduce a really important new technology like Wi-Fi for the first time, you would assume that the Pro products would get it first. You would assume the Power Mac would be the first to get this, but it didn't. Why do you think Steve Jobs chose to introduce AirPort to its iBook consumer portable first?
Was it to make a splash with the new model for consumers, or was it maybe that just being able to use your computer on the go suddenly... I mean, for me, it was amazing. I had one of the iBooks, and not the toilet seat one, but the cool one that came after, and I loved it. I took it everywhere with me, like a hacker from a '90s movie. You know, I always had my laptop in my backpack. I don't know, but tell me.
Well, I mean, this is my theory, right? Because Steve Jobs doesn't actually say this in the keynote, but my theory here is part of a broader theory, I guess, about how Steve Jobs thought about technology, is that he's always thinking about the solution rather than the tech. And he's thinking about, why are we using this technology? How does it help? When he introduces AirPort in the keynote, he introduces it like we're thinking about what kind of networking should the iBook have. And he talks about all these different like networking technologies that they think that they could introduce to the iBook. But the one thing that all those have is wires. And he says, we don't want wires for the iBook. And I think the reason for this is, what is the point of the iBook? The iBook is supposed to be like a portable iMac. And what is the point of the iMac? Well, the I in iMac was internet. The idea of the iMac was it was a Mac that would help you to go online. And I know that seems silly now because all computers, their whole point is to go online. They are just always online. But when the iMac came out, it was one of the first desktop computers to have an integral 56K modem. So before that, you plugged the modem into the Mac, but it was all integrated with the iMac. So you just plug your phone line into the Mac instead. And so that was part of this proposition that basically in the box, when you bought your iMac, it had the computer, the monitor, the keyboard, the mouse, everything that you need, including the modem, all integrated. So you just plug it in and you go online. That was the idea.
And I guess at this time, using the internet was beginning, but it wasn't super mainstream. It wasn't something that everyone did, and it wasn't necessarily even essential. So a lot of those people using computers for their work, the pros, you'd say, the only thing that they'd be using the internet for would be, a lot of the time, would be just to send their work to somebody.
Yeah.
And I didn't even do that. When I was doing graphic design, I would work on it on my computer, but these files were way too big to send over the internet. So I used my iPod in disk mode, put my graphic files on there, and then got on my bike and listened to something on the same iPod while I was riding into the Thames and Hudson office, and then hooked it up to their computer. I felt very modern.
I was working in design studios back then, and exactly as you say, the file sizes of the creative projects that we did, they weren't gigabytes in size, but they were hundreds of megabytes in size back then, and way too big to transfer on the internet. So in fact, you did send these files digitally at that time, but you used ISDN.
Oh yeah.
That would be like dialing directly from one server to another and using a completely different kind of connection, not using TCP/IP at all. So yeah, at this time, the internet was really just used for email and browsing the web. I remember back in the 90s, myself and my buddies were obsessed with the X-Files, and we used to download trailers of up-and-coming episodes on Fox in the US. We were based in the UK, and we didn't get the episodes till a year later. So we would wait for an hour to download a 15-second trailer to just get a taste of what was coming in the future on the X-Files. That was what the internet was for back then. Anyway, that gives you a bit of context. I think when Steve Jobs started thinking about what is the iBook is supposed to be a portable iMac. And what is the point of having a portable iMac if you can only actually access the internet when you're sitting at your desk? And so I think what he was thinking about is surfing the internet in bed or sitting on the couch and surfing the internet. This was not a use case for laptops back then. The purpose of the iBook was rather different to the PowerBook. the PowerBook was for pro users. And if you're designing something at the time, you know, the assumption was you'd be sitting at your desk. And you didn't need the internet because the files that you're producing are way too big anyway. So whilst Apple could have introduced AirPort on the PowerBook first, and it did indeed come to the PowerBook a year later, the PowerBook G3 Pismo was the first to get support for AirPort. But the reason I think that Steve Jobs pointedly chose to do it first with the iBook was because of this use case of consumers lounging around in bed or on the couch and surfing the internet. And that was what it was for. And it was so extraordinary as an idea that not only did Phil Schiller have to do a death drop to demonstrate it, but the other thing they do, which I thought was really, it's kind of cool, Steve Jobs' way of introducing it, is like he's showing off streaming video. I think he goes to like Disney.com on the iBook and he's streaming away video. And then he picks up the iBook and he starts walking around with it. He doesn't say anything. He's just still like watching the streaming video, and it takes the crowd a moment to realize what he's done, and he lets them catch up with him. He doesn't point it out because he's too cool for that.
Fantastic.
And then the crowd just goes wild because they just realize, well, look what he's doing. Again, it's something that these days you would just not think anything of, but no one had seen anything like this at the time. It was extraordinary, and the crowd was just going crazy. And then to really reinforce this point, Steve Jobs gets this white hula hoop, you know, and then he kind of runs that over his body.
No, like a magician showing that there are no wires.
Yeah, that's the extraordinary thing. And now we just assume things don't have wires, but this was like really magical back then.
I think this is one of Steve Jobs' one of his talents, I guess, is knowing how people would use technology. So he would, you take a look at something and realize. So in this case, it's streaming video or jumping off really high up things while using a computer. And then later it was, you remember the introduction of the iPad? That was a completely different keynote because he spent the time sat down in an easy chair.
Right, exactly.
In an armchair. And because this is the way that you use, and it is, that's kind of, I use my iPad like that, like all the time sitting down because it's much more comfortable to use than a Mac. And then I guess with the iPhone, he was making prank calls, so he knew everyone was going to make prank calls with that. That was when he called up the coffee shop and ordered coffee for everybody.
Yeah.
So I think this was a trick that he had, like knowing exactly what something was going to be used for.
I think so. Yeah, and I think one of the patterns that you can see, and even post Steve Jobs, Apple has done this as well. If you think about the timing of the adoption of new technology, Apple is rarely the first to adopt a new technology, right? So if you think about stuff like, if you think about the Apple Watch, I don't know if you remember, but everyone was making smartwatches before Apple brought out the Apple Watch. And in fact, lots of the media were at the time saying, oh my God, Apple's behind. Why aren't they? Where is their smartwatch? Like Samsung has already got a smartwatch out and Google's got a smartwatch out, and where Apple's lost its touch.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that's true, because I don't think it was any different to the way that Apple was always under Steve Jobs. If you look at something like the iPod, Steve Jobs brought out the iPod at a specific inflection point in technology. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the first MP3 player, but he brought it out when there were these micro hard drives that were small enough with enough anti-skip technology to put 1,000 songs in your pocket. And to him, the concept there was 1,000 songs in your pocket. And I think that's a bit similar here to sitting on your couch or lying in bed and surfing the internet. That was the dream.
Yeah, they launch something or make something when the technology is ready to do it in the way that they want to do it.
Exactly, yeah.
Exactly. Like the iPod, like you say, like the AirPort. At the you could have fast enough, I imagine low battery enough connection. Plus, you put Wi-Fi in something like a few years before, even if the technology was all available exactly the same, then maybe nobody would really see the point of it, because they're like, well, why do I need to connect? Yeah. Well, I guess actually that's one of the things that people would see the point of fairly quickly.
So I think that's exactly it. It's the inflection point of when the technology is right and it meets the use case in like a perfect way, or maybe not a perfect way actually, because if you look at, say, the iPhone when it came out, it wasn't perfect. It didn't have 3G. Right, It had GPRS, and there was a lot that wasn't great about it, but there was enough that it was ready to release. And then coming back to AirPort and Wi-Fi, actually this is a slightly different case in that Apple was a pioneer here because no other laptop maker had actually done this yet. They hadn't put Wi-Fi into a product. So I think Steve Jobs loves to be the first, and when he is the first, he'll really brag about it. But the timing is always about when he could find a really clear proposition of a product. Steve Jobs used to say he was a product guy, not a tech guy. The tech would be Wi-Fi, but the product would be a device that I can surf the internet in bed or on my couch, right? And that's I think what we see going on here. It didn't take long for the rest of the industry to catch up. Steve Jobs had developed this relationship with a company called Lucent.
Yeah, they're a networking company, no?
Right, yeah. They were actually, when AT&T was broken up, they were one of the divisions of AT&T that I think they were forced to sell off. They were based in New Jersey, and they had pioneered this 802.11 spec. They had several engineers there that had come up with this. And Steve Jobs partnered with these guys, and they developed the AirPort card. They're not around today. In fact, Lucent got bought a few years later by Alcatel, the French company, and then Alcatel got bought by Nokia. And so, it ceased to exist. But that's where the technology originally came from. And so, Steve Jobs was keeping a close eye on this. And I guess as soon as he saw the potential to integrate it into the iBook, he leapt, and Lucent worked with this, and it was really first to the market with this technology. But there was a solution for other companies as well. Do you remember PC cards?
Oh yeah, PC cards. They were just ways of expanding your computer by sticking them into a standard slot, but they do different things.
Exactly, yeah. Do you remember the kind of things that they were used for?
I remember there was one where you could add an antenna to the side, which would, I guess, be a Wi-Fi, where this comes from. But then also there'd be different kinds of connections you could add, like different ports.
Yeah.
But I don't know, maybe if you didn't have a VGA port on the side, you could add one of those, perhaps. But yeah, so it would be so they stick in the side of the... Usually there'd be like a little flap. I mean, they could go inside the machine, but often there'll be a flap, and you could
they go in this.
In,
yeah, right? They slid into the side mostly of laptops, and they're sort of credit card size, but thick, like a thick, chunky metal credit card. And they were developed by a body called the PCM-CIA industry group. And in fact, they were referred to for a long time as PCM-CIA cards, which is not as catchy as PC card.
No.
And yeah, the other things you could also use them for is they would have like flash drives. So this is before like those SD cards we know today. Like if you wanted like flash memory, then you could use a PC card for that. So the AirPort card was based upon this PC card technology, but it wasn't exactly the same because as you said, the Wi-Fi PC card had like an antenna sticking out at the side of it. So again, it's a funny thing to think about now because we don't really think about Wi-Fi as needing an antenna, right? And why is that?
That's because the antenna's inside the computer.
Exactly.
And with my iBook, when you put your PC card inside, I think the PC card actually sat underneath an extra layer of metal that you had to unscrew and pick up like a thin, maybe like some kind of radiation shield. But yeah, so you'd stick that in, and then you'd hook it into the computer, but you'd also have to hook it up to an antenna, and the antenna was a little wire that just plugged into the card, into the AirPort card, and then I think it ran around the edge of the screen. Yeah,
it was in both sides of the lid, that like little ears, but they were concealed within the lid. And so this was, as Steve Jobs said when he announced it, that it was the optimal place to put these antennas. And again, presumably these exist in the electronics of laptops today. We just never think about this stuff anymore, right? But so this is interesting because when Dell and the like then added support for Wi-Fi, this was initially with these PC cards. So you could stick a PC card into the side of your laptop, and it had a stupid little stubby antenna sticking up from it.
Yeah, like some of the Sony Ericsson phones had. I thought it was kind of cool looking. I would have preferred one of those metal, like a car radio antenna.
Yeah,
that pulls out.
Oh yeah.
That would have been pretty cool.
Yeah, you have one of those on top of your car these days, and then you look like you're a cop or something, right? You've got an antenna on the hood or the roof.
I think that's a good idea because then people don't fuck with you when you're driving around.
Exactly.
Take off the hubcaps, add a bunch of extra antennas on the back.
I think that Apple, one of the many industrial design things that you could credit them with is eliminating antennas, because Apple concealed the Wi-Fi antennas in the lid of its laptops, and eventually the rest of the industry copied them, but honestly not for years. In the early aughts, you'd see loads of people sitting in internet cafes with a stupid PC card with an antenna sticking out the side of the laptop.
A cool PC card.
Not a good look.
It's a great look.
It's not a good look, but not Apple ones. Apple ones, it was integrated. And even when the iPhone came out in 2007 with no antenna, still, if you look at some of their competitors like the Palm Trio, they had stubby little antennas as well. And I think it was only it's Apple's influential industrial design that was like, come on, guys, we don't need an antenna anymore. And maybe that indirectly led to Antenna Gate in the iPhone 4. But that's another episode in its own right.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to that one.
Okay, so they got Lucent to make a custom version of the PC card which didn't have the antenna and instead had, as you said, this little socket that you could plug the integrated iBook antenna into. One of the things to me that is very Apple-y and very Steve Jobsy about AirPort is you could buy that card separately, but you didn't have to buy that card separately. If you bought an iBook, you could have it with the card already pre-installed. I think this is how Steve Jobs liked to handle these kind of technologies. He liked it all already to be installed, hidden, so you could forget about it. Which is the way that it is today. No one buys a Wi-Fi card and installs it in their iPhone, right? You just assume that your iPhone is going to connect to Wi-Fi, and certainly it's the same with a laptop. But back in the day, there was a card, but if you bought a brand new iBook from Apple, by default, it already came with AirPort support. You didn't need to put the card in yourself unless you bought a really cheap one which didn't come with AirPort, in which case you could upgrade it later. In the same way you could add memory to a Mac.
Okay, that would be why, because I got the cheapest of the first iBook that didn't look like a toilet seat was the one I got.
The white polycarbonate iBook.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And but that didn't come with. I got the cheapest model, I think. Because it was already way too expensive.
Well, so trivia question: do you remember? And this applied for memory as well as the AirPort card in those early Apple portables. How you installed memory and the AirPort card?
You would take off the keyboard.
Yes.
Yeah, there were two little tabs at the top that you'd slide down, and it would pop open, almost like opening a battery tab on the back of a remote control, but bigger. And then, it was all inside there.
Apple had pioneered that memory under the keyboard solution for users to upgrade their own memory. And then they used that same solution to give people access to the AirPort card. I think it's a bit of a shame you had that experience of post-purchase installation of your AirPort card, because it spoils the seamless experience that Steve Jobs wanted for you.
I liked it, though. I liked being able to upgrade it. I don't remember having the option of having the Wi-Fi in it. Maybe if the option was there, I chose not to get it because I didn't think I'd need it. Maybe because I would have had to have bought an AirPort base station or similar.
Yeah, you would. Yeah.
In order to work with it. And I don't know how available those were before so I'd have ended up having to buy the AirPort, which was of course way more expensive than I wanted to spend. I see what you mean, that it would be nice to have had the thing built in already, but at the same time it was kind of nice to have the option to upgrade it later and then add that in without having to put one of those cool antennas on the side.
This was Steve Jobs' vision. You would buy this iBook and it was internet ready, in the same way that the iMac had the integrated 56K modem. The vision was it came with the card already in there, so you didn't even need to think about the card. And in fact, I guess because at this point Apple was still a troubled company and it wasn't the megacorp we know today. Nowadays, we have Apple Silicon. Apple designs the whole thing. But back then, one of the things that Jobs did was get rid of all the proprietary stuff and move to a much more standard architecture for Macs. That was part of moving away from stuff like the Apple Desktop Bus, which was the connector that you plugged in keyboards and mice, and switching to industry standard USB to reduce costs and to reduce inventory. It's another thing in the same 1999 keynote that Steve Jobs was super proud of, was the fact that they managed to get their inventory down to something like 15 hours of inventory that they were holding on average in the previous quarter. He was actually bragging about this on stage. I mean, I can't really imagine Tim Cook really talking about this, today. But it was Tim Cook was the supply chain genius who managed to get the inventory levels down so low. And it's a big deal of Apple moving into profit, because the longer that you have hardware just sitting around in the channel not being sold, the more it's going out of date, the more you don't sell it, the more it devalues. So it's really the dream in terms of running a profitable computer company to have as little channel inventory as possible. And that's something that Dell had pioneered. And Apple, when Steve Jobs joined, was terrible at this. I think it had a couple of months of inventory, and lots of those Macs just went into landfill because they were out of date before they were sold and no one wanted to buy them. So under Steve Jobs, with the help of supply chain genius Tim Cook, they managed to get the supply chain down. And a large part of this was moving away from proprietary things like Apple Desktop Bus to moving towards standards like USB, because then they could just buy these components from anyone rather than having a much more complicated supply chain of manufacturing proprietary things. So I think that's potentially part of the pragmatic choice that we see here, with the AirPort card actually being a slightly modified PC card. I think probably Steve Jobs would have liked it to be fully integrated into the chipset of the computers, but that just was not possible for Apple as it was back then. I don't think Steve Jobs wanted you to be able to install the card. I think he wanted it to be fully integrated into the iBook. But at the time, it just wasn't possible for him to do that. And I think that they just owned it in terms of, because we can't integrate it, we will make it user installable like we do with the memory, and you flip up the keyboard and stick it in.
Do you think this move to using standard stuff? Okay, so let's go to the original iMac. Came out when Apple was not doing very well at all.
Yeah.
And it took off, but that's the thing. One of the big thing about it was it was meant for the internet. And at that time, if you had a Word file from somebody on a PC, then you wouldn't. Could you open Word files on your Mac? I don't know.
You could, yeah.
Okay, so Word was okay.
Word existed on the Mac before the PC, right?
Okay, so not Word, but then there were all kinds of files that if I remember, people would send you a file and it was like, okay, is this a PC? Or if people heard you had a Mac and they say, oh no, I can't get files from you on your Mac, and I'd get really annoyed.
Example would be fonts. At the time, if you had a design job on a Mac and you gave it to someone with a Windows PC, the fonts wouldn't work.
Also, there would be software that you'd want to run and you just couldn't, because it was made for the PC, but you wouldn't get it on the Mac. So the Mac was a tiny user base compared to PC stuff. Yeah. No one was using the Mac. So by putting the internet on it, and I know you had to use Microsoft's web browser, but that was the thing, was their net was compatible with everything. And if the internet didn't know if you were, I know the internet doesn't know if you're a dog. I believe that's the truth. But the internet didn't know if you're on from this point of view, didn't know if you're on didn't care if you're on a Mac or a PC. So this suddenly kind of turned the Mac into something that was able to use all kinds of, do all kinds of things it couldn't do before. And then perhaps, with Steve Jobs wanting to get rid of old ports and things like this, combined with the fact that USB was a standard, and then the AirPort standard, maybe he saw, this was, okay, this is a way that our machines can be equivalent to PCs on this level, but then superior to them in other ways. And this is kind of what Apple's done ever since with the Mac. It's like you can do everything on a Mac that you can do on a PC. And so ever since then, it's been kind of, it could do everything a PC could do, but it did it better if that's what you thought.
Yeah.
Unless you preferred Windows, which, well, then you're a psychopath. So yeah, but I don't know. That's a theory I just came up with.
This was a pragmatic move made out of necessity of using these industry standard things, because it was the only way that the Mac keep its foot in the game, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But then Steve Jobs always wanted to own every part of the technology stack. So I think moving to Intel chips was another move in this direction, of moving away from something that was really quite proprietary to something much more industry standard. But from all the years of watching Steve Jobs, I think that one of the things in recent years that would have brought him the most joy would be Apple Silicon. I really don't think that he gave a damn about standards. And I think that actually the reason why he didn't even use the standard name of Wi-Fi for this product, because Wi-Fi wasn't used by anyone at this point, it's fair to say, but the industry consortium was called Wi-Fi, and they had just registered the Wi-Fi trademark. So it was their intention that it should be called Wi-Fi. I think Steve Jobs gave it a proprietary name because he was just proprietary by nature. And I think when Apple became powerful, they started moving away from standards. They started introducing their own proprietary stuff again, and there were some very good reasons for that. Apple Silicon is way better in so many respects, so there were good reasons for it. But I think we can look at this era of Apple making tech out of standard components, I think, as being more of a pragmatic move rather than any kind of serious ideological commitment to it. Even with the internet, I think it's a really, really good point, because the internet got the Mac back in the game again, because like suddenly if the web was the application layer, then as you say, the Mac could do that just the same as a PC. So great, we're back in the game. And I remember at the time, Microsoft wanted to create a sort of application layer for the internet that would be proprietary to Windows. And this was an existential threat, I guess, to the Mac. If things were going to move away from web technology and onto Microsoft's UI, then Apple would be screwed. And Microsoft was really pushing all these proprietary hooks into Internet Explorer, right? So even though they had Internet Explorer on the Mac, often you would get lots of websites that were designed for Internet Explorer on the PC. And so, Apple used to really protest against this. But it's funny the way that they were very quick to adopt their own application layer when the App Store came out. And suddenly people, it's like, oh, why use the web when you can just build an app for that? I think this is an interesting era for Apple because they're using standards like PC cards in this case, but they're giving them proprietary names and they're trying to hide them inside the body of their machines. The only reason they're generic components is cost and supply chain, not because they want them to be.
I'm thinking now it's going back the other way. You say that Apple's happy to do it with apps, but then what's happening now on the Mac anyway is that many apps like Slack and there you go, Slack will do, are using Electron. So they are using a web layer again. And so it doesn't really matter if you're using a Mac or a Chromebook or a PC, you're getting exactly the same thing. And the problem with that for a Mac user is that you're not getting the UI conventions that you expect. So your keyboard shortcuts don't work, or and it's just not designed to be a Mac-like app. Which if you're used to using Mac apps, then you want them to work like that, because that's it just makes it easier for you because you know how everything works.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think it's really interesting through that lens to look at AirPort and see that we've got Apple being amongst the first to adopt a new standard, really pioneering it, but not using the registered trademark of that standard, making it their own thing and kind of owning it. And Steve Jobs said we're just going to be their first and best. So I think he knew that it was going to be huge. They were going to do it in a different way. They were going to make it a proprietary thing. Now, the problem for Apple with being first to market with a Wi-Fi enabled laptop was that there were literally no Wi-Fi hotspots around, and ISPs didn't provide Wi-Fi either. Everyone bought their own 56k modems or cable modems. So there was absolutely no Wi-Fi for the iBook to connect to. So to solve this, Apple had to provide its own solution, the AirPort base station. A peculiar design, it looked something like a UFO. It wasn't enough for it to just be a stupid box like they later became. It was just something that they thought it was worth doing a beautiful TV ad that focused on the product design.
Yeah, and like practically speaking, I guess that the saucer top, how it goes to a shallow cone, would hide the antennas inside. That's a good way of doing that. And also because it's not flat, you can't put anything on top of it, which also is probably handy.
Yeah, that could be deliberate. Yeah, because you put something on top and it would attenuate the signal. Yeah, that's an interesting point.
Okay, I'm just looking now at a teardown video of the original 1999 AirPort base station. Hang on. And someone's opening it up inside. It's actually got an AirPort card inside it, which is quite interesting. Okay, yeah, I'm just like fast forwarding through the video, and it says Wave LAN on it. So there's actually probably very similar to the one inside the computer itself.
Yeah.
And then there's really nothing in the bottom. On the top or in the top, I don't know. There's a lot of space inside. It doesn't look like that top space is used to the antennae.
Interesting.
Well, we'll throw this video in the show notes because you can see inside it. It's quite interesting. It's somebody like tearing the thing apart. It's not iFixit. There's an iFixit one and it's terrible. It just shows you how to take the lid off. It's really old. Okay. Sorry, continue.
And I thought we should watch the TV ad for it now. Now tell me what you see.
Okay. It says television ad on the card ahead of time, so that's nice. Okay. And here comes the flying saucer.
Yeah.
Through a white sky. Oh, but look, it pauses in front of you, and it's got an Apple logo on the side. Dramatic music. Sounds like an old time 50s science fiction movie. Now it's spinning around. Now it's landed. This is quite slow in modern ad terms. Okay, so so all they do is basically the thing just flies in, spins around with dramatic sci-fi movie music.
Yeah.
Then lands, and then it just says think different.
But what I thought that was, to me, a terrible ad, because it doesn't really tell you anything about what that thing is.
Yeah, I don't think Apple ads ever do that, do they? They never tell you what something does. Okay, more recent phone ones are showing you like how to make a movie or this or that, but the introductory ones are very much about what the thing looks like.
Well, this was one of my favorite classic eras of Apple ads because they had Jeff Goldblum doing the voice, but they obviously couldn't afford Jeff Goldblum for the AirPort one because he doesn't say anything. They showed like 4 different ads that they commissioned for the iBook in this same keynote, and they all had a voiceover by Jeff Goldblum. And in fact, Steve Jobs got the audience to applaud for each to indicate which was its favorite ad, and that was the one that he was going to run in the Super Bowl. That ad style, which we just watched with the white background and the product flying around, it's something that Apple has used ever since, and it's something that the likes of Samsung have shamelessly copied over the years. This is the era where Apple first introduced that, and it's funny that they did it even for what's basically a wireless router, which today no one would even think about looking at.
No, you get one free. You get it free when you get the internet.
Right, yeah, you get it free from your ISP now, which is really what killed the whole router division for Apple. Bringing us then up to date to end this story. It was called AirPort for many years. Do you remember which version of macOS that they stopped calling it AirPort and started calling it Wi-Fi?
Okay, so did it have AirPort written up in the menu bar?
Yeah, so what I'm talking about the menu bar, and I'm talking about system preferences, as it was called then. Which version of macOS did they rename that Wi-Fi?
Probably when things started to go a bit more grey. I don't know.
Yeah.
With Snow Leopard, and so not Leopard. It was still there in Leopard and Snow Leopard because they're old. Was it something recent, like fairly recent, like Catalina, or was it before that?
When you remember it, it will come roaring back.
Was it Lion?
It was Lion. It was macOS 10.7 Lion. Yeah, so that was 2011. For 12 years, Apple used AirPort instead of Wi-Fi in its Macs. And it was getting a little bit embarrassing, to be honest, because from that original iBook that we were looking at, no one else had Wi-Fi. And the only way that you could use Wi-Fi, therefore, was with an Apple AirPort base station, right? So there weren't hotspots, as they became called, Wi-Fi hotspots. There was nothing like that. This was something that you would use in your own home. For a time, the competitor PCs, if you wanted to use a Dell PC with Wi-Fi, you had to use one of these stupid PC cards with the antenna sticking out the side, as I said.
But you could still connect to the AirPort, right? You could still connect to an AirPort.
You could, because it was a standard, but it was a different name. And you would probably buy if you're buying a Dell PC, you'd probably buy some Wi-Fi hub. But then you, Charlie, I think in the year 2000, you created the world's first Wi-Fi hub in a bar.
Could have been 2001, but it wasn't for customers' use. It was only for the use of the people who were there.
Right. So yeah, in 2011, then they started referring to it as Wi-Fi in macOS, and I think this is because of Wi-Fi hotspots. Basically, it had kind of switched that people were using their laptops on the move and using hotspots, and those were referred to as Wi-Fi. So I think it was a pragmatic decision in 2011 in macOS 10 Lion that they scrapped the use of the term AirPort in favor of the industry standard Wi-Fi. I like to imagine them agonizing over that because they, I think Apple's instinct is always proprietary. But
yeah, they name everything.
Yeah, but
they've got even worse at that now. Everything's got a name. But just to interject, do you know what Wi-Fi is called in Germany? What they call it?
Right. So this is Wi-Fi.
No, it's not. It's VLAN, which is W. V is like a W.
VLAN.
That's the German pronunciation. So if someone goes into a bar, even somebody, so which is wireless LAN, which is wireless local area network, which is crazy.
Logical.
And I suppose people who say Wi-Fi, native English speakers who say Wi-Fi don't realise that what does it stand? It's wireless fidelity, I think it mees, doesn't it? It's kind of one of these kind of backward names. It's just been kind of adapted from something else. Hi-Fi sounds good, so Wi-Fi also sounds good, but what does it really mean? I want to look that up now.
Yeah,
I want to know what Wi-Fi.
A VLAN, in that sense, it's more descriptive, I guess, of what it is. And the final nail in the coffin of AirPort is Apple continued making wireless routers until 2018. Then and during that time they released some hits, like you remember AirPort Express, and
I've still got one of those.
Right, AirPort Time Capsule was pretty awesome as well.
I have one of those.
They embraced the 8211G standard before it was ratified, and they called that AirPort Extreme, and they had another card for that. So it had quite a run for its money, but in 2018 they finally stopped making wireless routers altogether. And in a move which I think is uniquely Apple, they just shut the division down. I don't think any other company would do that because it was still a profitable business. Any regular tech company, if they didn't want it, they would just sell it, right? But I guess it's the nature of Apple that these things are so proprietary to Apple that they couldn't really sell their AirPort business. Can you imagine AirPort being an independent company selling wireless routers?
What about a Beats Wi-Fi by Beats, VLAN by Beats?
So yeah, they just shut it down, and I imagine that they shifted all the engineers into other things. I don't think that there were mass redundancies or anything. They just shut that business unit down and moved on. And that's the end of our AirPort story. So, Charlie, what lessons have we learned, do you think?
We've learned that Steve Jobs will stop at nothing and doesn't care about the safety of anyone when it comes to promoting Schiller. A product. Even Phil. We have learned that Apple invented Wi-Fi. Well, they were the first to put it in something. I think that's what we've learned, is that, they tend to be... Yeah, the Apple. It's another case of Apple taking existing technology, like the mouse, or
that's a good analogy. Like the mouse and the GUI. Yeah,
and then turning it into something.
Yeah, exactly. The way that I think about it, and AirPort I think beautifully illustrates this, is that they take a technology that already exists and show the industry what it's for. And that's the difference. So even with something like the smartwatches, smartphones, MP3 players, and maybe this will happen with Vision Pro as well, is they get into something, a technology which already exists, but the industry didn't really know what to do with it. And Apple somehow shows what it's for. And I think that's because they think in terms of products instead of technology, and they always have. And it's a pattern that you can trace all the way back. I was going to say to Steve Jobs' return to Apple, but I think you're right to take that example of the GUI, which they pinched from Xerox PARC, and again showed the industry what it was for and how you could use it.
Yeah, and up to do you remember when the iPad was due to come out in 2010 or 11?
It was 11, I think. Yeah,
11. And at CES that year, it was all about slates.
Yes.
Steve Ballmer was calling them slates. Everyone was calling them tablets or slates, and it was going wild because everybody wanted to make something before Apple did. There was a real sense, because I was writing about this at the time. I was at Gadget Lab at Wired, and there was a sense that exactly that everybody was waiting to see what Apple was going to do, because it's like, okay, how are they gonna and people have been waiting for that with the Vision Pro as well, even though I don't think that's actually what's happening. But people were waiting for Apple to come out with its VR headset to see, okay, how is this supposed to be done? And they've come out with something that's very impressive, I think. But I don't think they've come... I think this is the case where they haven't thought of the use for it first. They've actually come up with the technology first. So it's kind of counter to what we've been saying about everything else. Whereas
that's where I would challenge you a bit. I think a lot of people think that, but that is the critique that people made of the iPad as well, is like, it's great, but what's it for?
I could see what it was for. As soon as I saw one, I knew I wanted one, and I used it ever since. I mean, I loved it. It was so obvious. It was a computer that you could use that was, you would just hold on to.
Well, this is a whole other episode, but the problem was that you misunderstood what it was and thought that it was Mac.
No, I didn't. I never did. I tried to use it for a lot more than it should be used for, but that's not really a problem. I mean, it was up to... Yeah, that's a whole other episode.
That is one whole other argument that we will have to have on this show.
I think that might be a good episode, actually, because we do argue about that a lot, and I think you've got it. I don't know if you deliberately do it to deliberately misrepresent my argument for fun, and or if you really don't.
Okay, well, we're going to talk this one out. We're going to put a pin on that, and we're going to talk this one out live on this show, which is why Charlie is wrong about the iPad. So that's another episode of Apple Core, the Apple History Podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and if you're feeling especially generous, you could give us a review too. It really helps with our visibility. That's all for now, so until next time, bye-bye.